Jerry Lee Lewis's shocking decline, his house, family, and the truth behind his last years. Why did Jerry Lee Lewis retreat into isolation? Behind the wild performances, broken marriages, and a turbulent life, there's a story of regret, loss, and a final attempt at peace. What truly happened when the legend's fame faded? Stay tuned to uncover the shocking details you never knew.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes, sir. We had a very good reception, sir.
Oh, is that so?
Yes, we had a very nice time, and the people treated us real nice.
Scandals that rocked his love life. Jerry Lee Lewis, a name that once echoed through the halls of rock and roll legend, was no stranger to controversy. His fiery personality, which set his music ablaze, also set his personal life on fire, consistently fueling a trail of scandals that overshadowed his monumental career. To say Jerry was a complicated man would be an understatement. He was an enigma, a figure that the world could neither truly admire nor completely disdain. He lived life like he played the piano, fast, furious, and unapologetically loud. From the moment he burst onto the scene with his electric performances and wild charisma, he seemed destined for greatness. He was dubbed the Killer, a nickname that reflected both his unrestrained energy on stage and his destructive tendencies off it. He was a musical prodigy who could do it all: play piano, sing, compose, and set hearts on fire. With hits like Great Balls of Fire and Whole Lotta Shakin' Going On, Lewis became an icon of the 1950s rock and roll movement. His music stirred the soul, but it was his personal life that stirred controversy. Jerry Lee Lewis had a certain magnetism, a star power that couldn't be ignored. His love life, however, was a completely different story. As much as the world celebrated his musical genius, they couldn't ignore the bizarre and often unsettling details of his romantic escapades. The first scandal that truly shocked the world was his marriage to his 13-year-old cousin, Myra Gale Brown, in 1957, while he was still married to his second wife, Jane Mitchum. This act set the stage for a tumultuous pattern of relationships that would follow, a trail of marriages, divorces, and heartbreaks, all culminating in the erosion of his once blazing career. At the time of their marriage, Jerry Lee Lewis was already popular in rock and roll. He had been a heartthrob, a poster child for rebellion, and a symbol of youthful energy. But the union with Myra shattered his public image. His fans were stunned, and the media was relentless. Newspapers called it unthinkable, scandalous, and disgusting. Many fans couldn't wrap their heads around how someone they had once idolized could do something so controversial. The outrage was deafening, and Lewis's career took an immediate hit. Yet, in spite of the backlash, Jerry Lee Lewis defended his actions. In interviews, he tried to explain his relationship with Myra, telling anyone who would listen that they were in love. In one infamous interview with the New York Times, he insisted, "I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not a bad person. I love her and we're happy." But his words were met with skepticism. The media painted him as a perverted figure, a symbol of everything wrong with rock and roll's rebellion against societal norms. But it wasn't just the marriage itself that caused a stir. It was also the age difference. The legal and moral implications were far-reaching, and the public couldn't understand how a man in his early 30s could marry a child barely old enough to attend junior high school. Critics slammed him as a predator, while fans turned their backs on a man they once revered. The backlash was so severe that his career faltered, and he struggled to regain his footing in the music industry. In spite of the storm of media frenzy, Jerry Lee Lewis refused to bow down to public opinion. His stubbornness was evident in his continued marriages. Over the course of his life, Lewis would marry 7 times, each time to a woman whose identity was just as controversial as his own. But it was his marriage to Myra that would define his legacy, not just as a musician, but as a scandal-ridden figure who lived by his own rules, no matter the cost. For years, Myra and Jerry Lee lived a tumultuous life, but their union was not built to last. They divorced in 1970, but not before having 2 children together. His second marriage, to Jaron Elizabeth Gunn Pate, came just a few years after his divorce from Myra, but by then, the damage had already been done. Jerry Lee Lewis's reputation had been permanently tainted. The man who had once been the face of rock and and roll's golden age had now become a walking scandal, and the media was more interested in his relationships than his music. As Jerry Lee moved from one marriage to the next, each relationship seemed to reflect the chaos that defined his life. The singer married Shawn Stevens in 1983, but she tragically died under suspicious circumstances in 1984. The official cause was an overdose, but rumors swirled about the nature of her death. Was it an accident, or was there something darker at play? His next wife, Carrie McCarver, lasted until their divorce in 2004, but even this marriage was fraught with drama. Jerry Lee's third wife, Carrie McCarver, claimed that Jerry Lee had a violent temper and was often prone to rage fits. In an interview, she spoke about the volatility of their relationship, explaining that his explosive nature wasn't limited to his stage persona. It was all-consuming, even when the cameras weren't rolling. He was a monster, McCarver stated, recalling how their marriage was plagued by infidelity and anger. Even with the repeated divorces and dramatic marriages, Jerry Lee never seemed to learn from his mistakes. He continued to chase love, often looking for it in the most unexpected places, yet finding nothing but destruction. It seemed as though every time he found a new wife, he was searching for redemption, but the search was never quite successful. Over the years, Jerry Lee Lewis granted numerous interviews in which he discussed his controversial life. One such interview with Rolling Stone in 2006 revealed his unabashed attitude toward his past. He said, "I don't give a damn what they think. I've lived my life the way I wanted to, and I don't regret a thing." His words were defiant, unrepentant, and unmistakably Jerry Lee. Jerry Lee Lewis's life was marked by fiery passion and impulsive choices, which led to a tragic decline from musical stardom. His relentless pursuit of happiness through tumultuous marriages ultimately made him not just a rock and roll pioneer, but a cautionary tale of living without limits. But beneath the scandal and shattered romances, what kind of man was Jerry Lee when the spotlight dimmed, when only fatherhood and loss remained? Come with us to know. Fatherhood amidst tragedy. Jerry Lee Lewis was a man of contradictions, known for his wild music and chaotic personal life. He was an unstoppable force in the music world, someone who lived fast and loud. But behind the curtain of fame, he carried the weight of personal loss that shaped the man he was. Behind the flashy performances and headline-grabbing scandals, there was a father whose heart was broken by grief. While the world was captivated by his wild lifestyle, very few saw the deep emotional scars he carried from losing his children. Jerry Lee became a father for the first time in 1959 when his first son, Steve Allen Lewis, was born. His second son, Jerry Lee Lewis Jr., followed just a year later in 1960. In spite of his chaotic lifestyle, Jerry Lee adored his children. In interviews, when the topic of fatherhood came up, he softened. There was something different about the way he spoke of his kids. "I wanted to be there for them," he said in an interview with Rolling Stone. "I wasn't just their father, I was their protector. I made sure they were safe." Jerry Lee wanted to shield his kids from the craziness of his world, even though that world was quickly spiraling out of control. But life would soon test Jerry Lee in ways he never imagined. In 1962, when Steve was just 3 years old, tragedy struck. Steve drowned in the family's swimming pool while Jerry Lee was inside the house. Jerry Lee was devastated. His son, the first child he had ever loved with such depth, was gone in an instant. The details were gut-wrenching. Steve had wandered outside, slipped into the pool, and drowned before anyone could get to him. Jerry Lee was crushed. Losing a child was a pain no one could prepare for, and it shattered him in ways that fame or music could never heal. After the loss of his son, Jerry Lee went into isolation. He couldn't escape the heartbreak. The world may have continued to turn, but Jerry Lee was a man broken by grief. He returned to his music, but the sadness never left him. His performances lacked the spark they once had. Even in interviews, his eyes carried the burden of loss. "I don't talk about it much," he said years later in an interview with People magazine. "I try not to. It hurts too damn much." It was clear that no matter how many times he tried to move on, the grief of losing Steve lingered. But the pain didn't end there. In 1973, Jerry Lee's second son, Jerry Lee Lewis Jr., was killed in a car accident. He was just 19 years old. The loss of a second son was too much for Jerry Lee. 2 children gone, each death leaving a mark so deep it seemed like a wound that would never heal. In an interview with the New York Times in 1985, Jerry Lee spoke for the first time in years about the profound loss he had experienced. His voice was soft, the hurt raw. "I love my kids," he said, his words faltering, "but no man should have to bury his children. I don't know how to explain it. It's just wrong." These words words, uttered with such pain, gave the world a glimpse into the real man behind the wild persona. For all his fame and bravado, Jerry Lee was a father whose heart had been broken in the most unimaginable way. In the aftermath of these losses, Jerry Lee rarely spoke about his sons. Instead, he deflected questions, hiding his sorrow behind humor and distractions. He didn't want to acknowledge the depths of his grief, not even in the public eye. He felt that talking about the deaths would only make them more real. In interviews, he would joke about other parts of his life, but would quickly move away from any mention of his children. It was as if acknowledging the loss would only make the wound deeper. However, there were rare moments when Jerry Lee opened up about his pain. One such moment came in a Rolling Stone interview just before his death. He spoke about his children and what they meant to him, acknowledging the tragedy that had shaped him. "They're all I've got now," Jerry Lee said. "My legacy isn't just the music, it's them. I don't want to be remembered for all the craziness. I want to be remembered as a father who loved his kids." These words, so simple yet profound, revealed the man behind the rock star, the man who had lost everything but his love for his children. Jerry Lee's ex-wife, Shawn Stevens, also spoke candidly about their family life. She told Entertainment Weekly that although Jerry Lee loved his children, he wasn't always emotionally available. "He had his own demons," she said. "I think he just couldn't face what had happened to his boys. It was too much for him." Despite the emotional distance, Jerry Lee's love for his kids was undeniable. In the quiet moments of his life, when the music stopped playing, it was his children who were always on his mind. Jerry Lee's life was a complicated mixture of highs and lows. His music, his fame, and his personal life were filled with ups and downs, but the love for his children was constant. That love, however, was forever tainted by the pain of loss. The pain never left him. It remained in his eyes, in his words, and in the spaces between the notes of his music. After losing his sons, where could a man like Jerry Lee Lewis possibly go to escape the noise of fame and the silence of grief? Come with us to know. The Abandoned Ranch. For a man whose career spanned decades and whose fame stretched across generations, there was an angle of him that was not as widely known, the quieter, more introspective side. Unlike the wild scenes fans were used to, smashed pianos, loud crowds, and sudden headlines, life on the ranch in Nesbitt moved slowly. The buzz of fame was replaced by long, quiet days. Surrounded by wide fields and aging fences, Jerry Lee Lewis seemed to disappear into a world of stillness. For him, the ranch wasn't just land, it was distance from everything that had once consumed him. In interviews, Jerry Lee had often spoken about the desire for peace in his later life. His image was forever tied to the wild performances that launched him into superstardom, but the man behind the killer moniker longed for something simpler, a place to get away, to retreat into solitude, and find some sort of balance after decades of personal chaos. The ranch in Nesbitt, Mississippi provided just that, or so it seemed. Tucked away in the quiet of rural Mississippi, the ranch offered the perfect setting for Jerry Lee's final years. Away from the noise, away from the scandals, away from the spotlight. But was it truly a peaceful haven, or was it simply another part of his complex and often turbulent life? Reports and rumors about Jerry Lee's property in Nesbitt paint a picture of a man who was increasingly out of the public eye, seeking refuge from the very fame that had both made him and torn him apart. The details of the ranch itself, however, remain shrouded in mystery. There were mentions over the years of Jerry Lee spending time there, enjoying the solitude that the 40-acre property offered, but as time passed, questions about its condition began to surface. Was the property abandoned, or had Jerry Lee simply retreated into a private world so thoroughly that its existence became little more than a footnote in the annals of his career? The media, which had once followed his every move with a sharp, critical eye, seemed to turn its gaze elsewhere. Interviews in his later years with outlets like Rolling Stone and the New York Times only vaguely referenced the ranch, if at all. Jerry Lee would occasionally speak of it in passing, a side note in his stories of his past. In one interview with CBS News, he described the property as, "My last chance to be at peace. I don't need the limelight anymore. I just want to live my days quietly." This statement reflected a side of Jerry Lee that few people outside of his closest circles were familiar with, a man who had grown weary of the chaos and was seeking a more serene life. But the question remained, what had become of that peace? As the years passed and the media's interest in Jerry Lee Lewis waned, the state of the ranch became less and less clear. Was it still a refuge for the aging rock star, or had it been abandoned, left to weather the passage of time? Some reports suggested that the property had fallen into disrepair after Jerry Lee's health declined, while others hinted that he had sold it. The truth, however, was never fully confirmed. Interviewed by The Guardian in the late 2000s, a longtime friend of Jerry Lee's, Larry Huff, revealed that Jerry Lee had indeed kept the ranch in his family, but as the years went by, it became less of a sanctuary and more of a symbol of what he had left behind. He spent a lot of time there when his health started to go, but you could tell he wasn't the same guy. He was still sharp, still Jerry Lee, but there was something different about him. Huff's words gave an insight into how Jerry Lee viewed his later years. Not as a man defeated, but as someone who had retreated from the harshness of his past. In spite of the mystery surrounding the ranch, the property held an undeniable significance in Jerry Lee's life. It represented both an escape and a surrender. The ranch had seen better days. Once a symbol of Jerry Lee's attempt to reclaim some peace, it had now become a reminder of the battles he had fought and the toll those battles had taken. In an interview with People magazine, Jerry Lee spoke briefly about the ranch, calling it home, but admitting that it had become harder to maintain in his later years. It's tough to keep up a place like that when your health isn't what it used to be. I've got my family to look after it now, but I can't do much more than sit on the porch and look out at the land. In his later years, Jerry Lee Lewis found peace on a quiet ranch in Nesbit, Mississippi, a place once seen as his escape from the chaos of fame. But as his health faded, the ranch transformed from a sanctuary into a symbol of everything he had left behind. Weathered and still, it mirrored the aging legend himself. Locals still speak quietly about the ranch, its current state unknown, yet its history deeply tied to Lewis's legacy. What really unfolded in the final chapter of Jerry Lee Lewis's life after all the fire and fame? Stay with us to know the tragic end. The final years of Jerry Lee were defined by a series of health struggles that slowly chipped away at his once vibrant persona. Born in 1935, Jerry Lee's journey through life had always been turbulent, full of highs and lows, triumphs and failures. But as the years passed, he found himself facing battles far different from the ones that had defined his career. It was the fall of 1987 when Jerry Lee Lewis first began to experience serious health issues. What followed were years of growing physical problems, including a series of strokes that left him physically weaker, unable to perform the way he had in his prime. In interviews with Rolling Stone and other outlets, he openly admitted that his body was beginning to betray him. It was in these rare, candid moments that Lewis shed the larger-than-life persona and gave a glimpse into the quiet vulnerability that had long been hidden. Through all the wildness and unpredictability that marked Jerry Lee's earlier life, the later years brought a harsh reality he couldn't escape. As his body weakened, so did the pace of the life he once knew. The powerful energy that had once surged through his fingertips now lingered only in memory. No longer able to storm the stage like he used to, Jerry Lee was forced to slow down, an unfamiliar rhythm for someone who had lived so fast. Still, there was a flicker in his eyes, a stubbornness that showed he hadn't fully let go of the man he used to be. During an interview with the New York Times in 1997, he remarked, "I don't know how much longer I've got, but if I go tomorrow, I know I've lived life. I've lived it on my own terms." His words echoed the defiance that had marked his entire career. He had lived hard, loved fiercely, and played with a reckless abandon that had made him a legend. As his health worsened, Jerry Lee's personal life became even more fractured. His later years were marked by his retreat from the public eye. Gone were the larger-than-life performances and fiery interviews. In their place, he lived in relative isolation, often seen only by those closest to him. In interviews with Rolling Stone and Pitchfork, those close to him revealed that he found comfort in solitude, especially after years of dealing with the demons from his past. "The man we saw on stage was never the man we saw behind closed doors," one of his close friends remarked. "He was soft-spoken, quiet, almost shy in those moments. The killer was gone, replaced by someone who was just trying to survive." In spite of his quiet, withdrawn nature in his final years, the ghosts of his past were never far behind. His chaotic relationships, multiple marriages, and tragedies were a constant shadow that followed him. In a rare interview with People magazine in the late 1990s, he broke down in tears as he reflected on his children. "No man should ever have to bury his children," he said, his voice trembling. "It's a pain that never goes away." The emotional toll of his life began to weigh heavily on him as his health deteriorated further. In his final years, he grappled with the loss of his youthful vigor, and at times, he seemed to lose hope. "I just want peace," he told the New York Times during one of his last interviews. "All my life I've been fighting for something. Now I just want to rest." His words reflected the weariness of a man who had fought countless battles, against the expectations of society, against the ghosts of his past, and finally, against his own body. As his health failed, he was largely removed from the limelight. His legacy, though, remained in the hearts of millions who had been touched by his music. When Jerry Lee Lewis passed away in October of 2022 at the age of 87, it marked the end of an era. His death was not a shocking one, given his long struggle with illness, but it still sent shockwaves through the world. Many outlets, including Pitchfork, mourned the loss of a legend, describing him as a titan of rock and roll, a man who had lived a life full of contradiction, at once a wild, untamed force and a deeply wounded soul. In the wake of his death, the music world paused to reflect on the life and legacy of a man who had left an indelible mark on rock and roll history. If his final days were marked by reflection and regret, what did the legend truly leave behind when the music finally stopped? Keep watching to uncover what he left behind. Net worth left behind. When Jerry Lee Lewis passed away, people weren't just talking about his music or wild past. They were also wondering about the fortune he left behind. For someone who had lived such a dramatic life, it wasn't a surprise that his money story was just as full of ups and downs. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated to be around $10 to $15 million. That might sound like a lot, and it is, but it didn't come easy. Back in the late 1980s, Jerry Lee was in serious financial trouble. In fact, in 1988, he filed for bankruptcy, drowning in over $3 million of debt. Shockingly, more than $2 million of that was owed to the IRS alone. His ranch, cars, and even his prized possessions were at risk. Many people thought that might be the end of the road for the killer, but Jerry Lee wasn't the kind of man to give up. He made a comeback, not with wild stunts, but through the thing he knew best, his music. He continued to tour, released new albums, and appeared in shows well into his later years. Over time, he began to rebuild the wealth that once seemed lost. He also made smart decisions, investing in real estate and making sure he held onto valuable assets. According to Celebrity Net Worth and Music Times, this is how he managed to grow his fortune again by the time of his passing. Interestingly, when it came to his estate, things weren't as straightforward as people might have expected. Reports suggest that Lewis chose to exclude some of his children from his will, a decision that raised eyebrows. This move left both fans and family members surprised, sparking curiosity about the reasons behind his choices. Also, because his estate was valued under $12 million, the federal tax limit at the time, it avoided heavy taxes. And since Mississippi doesn't charge a state estate tax, most of his money stayed with those named in his will. According to those close to him, including longtime friend and manager Judith Brown, Lewis remained sharp about his finances till the very end. He once told The Guardian in an older interview that he had learned to keep a close eye on who gets what. That too became part of his legacy, one that, like his music, won't easily fade. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and share your thoughts below. Don't forget to check out the cards for more celebrity tales you won't want to miss.